It's time to have a discussion about the evilness of cults and how the idea of egregores or memetics, in association with that, at the astral planes has created, or mental planes, has created problems for the collective of humanity like you would not fucking believe. And how different individuals who have a history of believing in cults are associated with illusory correlations, issues described in the video that's titled "The USA Supports Elliot Rogers, but Australia Does Not," articulates in relation to what's called called parasocial behaviour. It discusses that issue in relation to cults as well. So let's talk about the ideology of several different cults that are from the northern hemisphere and why they are dangerous. Pros and cons. Okay, pros. Okay, the seven seals. When the person has their self, protects them from spirits going in and out. So they're in their tin can and they're fine. Cons. The New Age movement has misidentified seals with chakras. Because the seventh seal is actually located on the 12th plane, it cannot possibly be the seventh chakra or the crown. The seventh seal only busts once someone reaches the global level. At the global level, the seventh seal busts. The global level is also known as the 12th plane or the collective. The 11 planes of consciousness, which, by the way, does not describe consciousness in the same way that psychology does. It's a misuse of term because cults lack the adequate language to describe what they're talking about. So words like planes and dimensions are often interchanged when they probably ought not to be. It's also the case that words like mind, consciousness, and spirit are often interchanged with words like egregore or memetics when they ought not to be. It's also the case that the New Age movement has conflated seals with chakras when they should not. Okay, so the reason why the seventh seal is on the 12th plane is because that is meant to protect at the collective level. Okay, beyond there is something called the Ezekeil wheel. Okay, the Ezekeil wheel before the 1950s or the 1940s had nothing to do with the Zeta Reticulan aliens. It was an astral device that was created through memetics of the collective mind as a means by which to describe the issue of people who managed to break the seventh seal, which is associated with the Book of Revelations and not with the New Age movement and not with chakras, being able to access collective mind. So at that point, assuming that the devil had not harvested their soul as described in the Book of Revelations, and they'd therefore gone to live in someone else's head, which is technically what happens, that person would have been inside their vehicle, observing around them the third eyes of everyone else. Because in that situation, the person got harvested, in other words, stolen by another person. They started to walk around as the third eyes of everyone else and became the Ezekiel wheel, as it were. Because after the 1950s, there's some association with the Zeta Reticulans. The Zeta Reticulans started to manipulate the Ezekiel wheel with a group called the Tall Grey Aliens. So that's where the New Age movement comes into it from the late 1800s through the 21st century, and in particular after the 1970s. This has become this hierarchy-based conflation where they've confused words that they've gotten from one culture and tried to lay it over another. In the case of chakras and seals, they've done that. It's also the case when it comes to the idea of God's holy host being aliens from outer space. That's simply not the case. The aliens from outer space are a completely different phenomena. They're associated with the interdimensional hypothesis and dimensional portals being created by solar flares as a means that highly charged particles can create ruptures between realities, and the aliens in fact come from a different universe entirely, not a different part of our galaxy, and are therefore not associated with the star sign Orion, the constellation Orion, or Sirius and A and B in general. And this is why different recipients have spoken to different aliens of a similar class or type and been told that they're from different places than each other. So, for example, they might say that that particular class of alien is from Orion, or they might say they're from Sirius A or B, or to a different recipient, they might say they're from somewhere else. When actually, they're not from any of those constellations at all. They're actually from entirely different universe, created by a puncture, created by the solar flare. Okay, so when you understand that seals and chakras are not the same thing, and that aliens from outer space are not actually from our galaxy, from a different constellation, they're actually from a completely different universe, we need to talk into discussion about the difference between cults and science with the word universe, and why this is vitally important. In the New Age movement, they've sort of said that the universe is within and you're a universe. Okay, so different heads are different universes. This is one universe. Well, actually, it's not, it's a multiverse in that language. And a different head might be a universe. Okay, so what that language, that sort of metaphor refers to, is quite different from the actual language being used by the scientists and the physicists. So this conflation between physics and consciousness needs to end. Okay, there is no relationship between the two. That spiritual realities are just that, realities. There are actually many of them, not few. There's lots and lots and lots of them. None of them correspond to the actual term universe or cosmos as it's applied by the sciences. It is, however, the case though that spirits can operate at different speeds. This is where the issue of spirits and whether or not their light becomes complicated, because spirits can operate at different speeds to each other, or that the same spirit can change their speed. It typically means that they are not light. Okay, light is said to have to be the universal constant, or to have the same speed. So whether you define that speed as the fastest thing there is, or as having no, or not moving at all, is beside the point. It's classified as the universal constant. Okay, and that means that it doesn't change its speed. If it was to interact with something that could influence its speed, it doesn't change its speed. It changes its direction and refracts, and becomes a different color. Okay, so that sort of principle of light needs to be differentiated from spirits in a very clear fashion, to understand that the language of physics and the language of the spiritualists is not the same. Okay, so a universe is actually might be likened to what you'll find on the other side of a black hole. Okay, so a black hole is a spinning singularity to which all the events that we call the bands of the Milky Way galaxy, for example, appear on the surface of, but simultaneously having those bands outside in a state of paradox, of both being contracted and expanded at the same time. The context of the galaxy are both inside the black hole and outside the black hole, as a context of the paradox of what a black hole is. Okay. Okay, so when you define a group of people as a galaxy, or a person as a planet, or something like that, that metaphor creates a paradox, okay, of language that it causes spiritual problems. Okay, they are not the same thing. It is possible to walk around as a quote-unquote multiverse, in the sense that you have an Ezekeil wheel, or you are operating as the aperture of the Ezekeil wheel, and therefore the different third eyes of people come and go. In that particular context, to reach that place, this is where the problems are coming into it. To be able to get to that space, you have to enter a situation called sunyata, which means you do have to lose your identity. Someone does have to harvest and steal you. Okay, and so this interaction between the different cults, in that case Buddhism and Christianity, okay, is activated or done by the Satanist, okay, and then the person who loses everything gains everyone else, okay, and here's another paradox of language as well. There's self. When self is gone, there's nothing, and then of course the other alternative to nothing is everything and everyone else. So that is another issue there. So the way that reality has been defined by the collective is erroneous. So there's also the other issue of the tesseract boxes, or the cubes associated with Saturn. Saturn in this case cannot be described as Aquarius or Capricorn in the Western zodiac. It's referring to this idea that there are legitimately fucking aliens from outer space with a goddamn fucking spaceship parked near Saturn, between Saturn and Jupiter, called Lord Ashtar Command, and they've been alleging they've been doing stuff on the planet Titan, which, by the way, is not a planet, it's a gaseous moon of Saturn. And by the way, Saturn, they reckon, doesn't have any rocks on it anyway. It's also gaseous, so the ability to land a spaceship there just doesn't exist. So this is the contradictions in the stories to see where some errors are gone in there. So back to the idea of hierarchy, you can see that there's errors creeping into that story already, and you can also see that some of the ideological language associated with the Borg cube / Tesseract system is associated with the Atlanteans. Now, Atlantis is not a continent. Atlantis is a reference to an island off the coast of West Africa, which still exists and has been commandeered by cultic forces to engage in a particular type of behaviour associated with the AI transhuman agenda. Now, it refers to that because there was once an island there called Atlantis, according to the philosopher Plato, who was documenting the stories of the bards of Greece at the time, and said that the island of Atlantis once existed beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which are also known as the Gates of Gibraltar, and was destroyed in a cataclysm that roughly these days would be called a tsunami. Okay, he alleged that it happened 20,000 years earlier. However, it's probably more likely the case that it was during the Santorini eruption, and Atlantis was actually a small island off the west coast of Africa, just south of the Canary Islands, and that on Google Earth you could see that approximately 15 years ago or something like that, before they covered up the images, you could see a small island had sunken with some square stone buildings that would have been consistent for the building style at the time, and it's possible what's now called modern Morocco, that civilization and what's now called southern Spain, those people would have interacted with the Atlanteans, and they would have been the origin of the god Poseidon, which was adopted by the Greeks. Okay, because the Greeks did not invent Poseidon and the Romans didn't invent Neptune. The Greeks actually got it from a different society close to Morocco, and that would probably be the island of Atlantis. So that island is sunk, but there is a different island there that they have a facility on, and they call it the Illuminati facility or the Illuminati White Room. And there they say they have these computers or something like that that can talk to satellites for the purposes of field manipulation. So that's how that story works. That is a very different thing from the idea of, or the actual experience of, a person being removed from their vehicle because the seventh seal busted, so their tin can was open and they were taken away. The cults, when they use the word world, planet, or universe, are not saying the same thing as ordinary people are saying. When an ordinary person speaking English uses the word world or globe, they're referring to the actual fucking planet. Okay, with all the continents and seas on it and people and animals and trees and whatever else. Okay, so they're not referring to someone's head. When a scientist refers to the word universe, they're referring to all that stuff with stars in it. When a cultist refers to that, they're referring to something else. Okay, and so to comprehend that difference in language is important. So someone who was not a cultist, who has a seventh seal bust, had a drastically different intention of words and meanings than a cultist who might show up later through the Ezekeil wheel system, who believes in things like that. It's also the case that what you call Joachim and Boaz, in the Kabbalistic interpretation, whether it's the Crowley one or not, at this point are illusory correlations. So the people that invented that had a piss poor comprehension of psychology, they had a piss poor comprehension of solar physics, and they weren't in fact talking to aliens at the time, unless you're talking about Aleister Crowley, which it might be different because he did his stuff after the era of flight. So before the era of flight, it might have been a different set of experiences. They might not be talking to aliens at all. They might not have interpreted as any of the beings that they were talking to as being from outer space anyway, and here they were talking to them at all, okay, or communicating with those spirit beings. So the differences in eras are important in comprehending the different cults and worldviews, and non-cults as well. The differences in language are required to comprehend that type of thing. But what needs to be understood about the Ezekeil world is the exact same word is an aperture. It's an eye. Okay? And that means it is a hole. Okay? Okay, the lens of your eye opens up and closes like a hole, like an aperture to let light through. Okay? There is no boss of it. you understand that there's no boss of it? There isn't a single being that can be bosses of it. They all pass through. Okay, and then go back to the place on the wheel that they came from. That's the purpose of it, okay? It's just a place they pass through. Okay? It's almost like that part of a Rubik's Cube, like when it gets connected up to the Tesseract system, it roughly functions a bit like that part of the Rubik's Cube that doesn't have a cube on it. So you can move the other cubes around. At that point, none of the cubes are the boss of that whole spot, or the Rubik's Cube entirely. They're just sections of it, and they move around. That's literally all there is to it. It's no more complicated than that. Okay? So if you try and say that anyone or anything is the boss of that, like any spirit that is, okay, the spirits are like the cubes, or the spirits live in the cubes, okay, and those cubes get moved around like a Rubik's Cube, okay, and the Ezekeil wheel is the hole that they're moving through. It's like the empty cube. Okay, so when the regular cube moves into the empty cube, okay, that cube can talk, but then it has to move on, and that Rubik's Cube keeps cycling around and cycling around and cycling around and cycling around. Okay, because that picture of the Rubik's Cube is never put together properly, because all the different cubes got different cult information, which means they're not communicating properly. Okay, the Rubik's Cube functions a bit like the Tower of Babel, with all the different languages, all the different cult languages confusing each other. And one of the most confusing languages of all is this idea of dominance, of male dominance, for example, which, by the way, was encoded in that stuff. So these stupid Masonic pricks who think that actually harvesting someone is actually doing the work of God have missed the fucking point. The Bible is actually made up. So when you look what Ezekeil, what the actual origin of it is, okay, it has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with aliens from outer space. Okay, what it actually is a mind got too big for its own fucking boots. And yes, there were egregores called seals that was put on that mind or that spirit or that person. Okay, so their tin can didn't open up yet. Okay, but that's not the same as chakras. Okay, you can understand the difference between a vortex and a lid. You might get somewhere. A seal is like a lid. A chakra is like a vortex. Okay? Okay? So this comprehension, the way the cults have mismanaged the language has caused confusion. Okay? What the Christians meant, what the Masons did with it are not the same thing. What the New Age movement did with Masonry is not the same thing. What Aleister Crowley was talking about was not the truth. So even though all these prophets, quote unquote, have been perceiving something, okay, we're not even arguing that they haven't experienced something that exists, okay? They are experiencing something, okay? But they are misinterpreting what they're experiencing. And the way that they are doing it is through their cults and their worldviews and projecting those onto situations so that it creates problems for other people. It's been forcing people to experience things they ought not to experience, a continuation of that curse. So burn your Bible, burn your Kybalion, okay? These people that talk to spirit guides, right? Okay, and try to, this is really annoying, okay? This woman Karen from the United States of America, so we'll completely distinguish from the other Karens of the world for a second, okay? Or just in generally, she deserves that distinguishment actually, okay? Is a person who seems like a very lovely kind of character that, you know, and she does her coffee with Karen thing. It's like, you know what? She seems like the kind of person you would want to have a cup of tea with. Okay, she seems like a nice lady. Okay, the thing is though, Absolute garbage with her dowsing rods and the idiomotor effect, and it came to Pope Francis, okay? On the subject of doctrine, if you knew the difference between Kybalion doctrine and Catholic doctrine, you would know straight away that Pope Francis wouldn't have had a soul contract, because soul contracting was an idea that was invented by the book Kybalion, written by a guy named Atkinson in the late 1800s. Okay, it was called the New Thought movement. It has nothing to do with Catholicism. Okay, Pope Francis would not have had a contract with anyone or anything, except when he was physically incarnated, he would have made one with the Catholic Church as his, employment contract through the process of ordination, being a priest and whatever else. So to sort of conflate one worldview with another is unfair to both. So as the cubes move through the Rubik's cube, okay, and as the beams pass through the aperture and go back to where they came from, okay, they need to know that their worldview is just that a worldview, and they've got to go back to where they come from and acknowledge where it come from, and stop expecting other spaces to take care of their fucking shit. And by the way, on the subject of just because someone gets given an Ezekeil will and all the other beings might be projected at them as a consequence of misogyny against women in particular, okay, it doesn't actually follow that they are actually all those other beings or identify as them. There are actually some people who don't think that everyone else is self and they are everyone, that they are God or God exists within or some crap like that, or that they're Mother of the Messiah, just because some cult decided that their birth numbers were the fucking Virgin Mary and the fucking chief fucking, what's her name? Boss of the Athenoi or some crap. Heck, even if some arsehole talked through their head once to fucking say that in a bionic fucking state, it still wouldn't be an actual truth of the situation. Okay? It would just be cult talk. Okay? When you talk about egregores, what an egregore is a mimetic chain. Okay? So they did, 4chan and whatever else, did some stupid egregore where Donald Trump was, Keck, or he was... that Michael Cole did, he was the Antichrist, or he was the Christ, and they decided, is that how it works? The Antichrist has become the Christ or whatever, so the God Narcus becomes fucking Jesus, does he? And so Donald Trump thought he was the fucking Pope? Like, come on! Who he really is an old guy who's got 34 fraud convictions, who shouldn't be the fucking president, who likely has some form of dementia or another. Okay? He's just a person. He's just a bloody person. What about Elon Musk? He's just a bloody person with schizotypal personality disorder. There is no hierarchy where those people are actually bosses. In the spiritual world, there is no bosses. There's just a bunch of beings moving around. That's all there is. Just beings moving around and occasionally having doings. That's it.